good afternoon, everyone. And for the tech support, please add the other panelists to the spotlight. Thank you very much. Good afternoon and good morning to Haluk Soydan, since it's very early in the morning at the East Coast, now at the West Coast in the USA. I think it's 5:30 or 5:40 in the morning. So thank you very much for getting up so early and joining our panel discussion. I'd like to welcome you all to our final panel of the annual conference of the German Association of Social Work on the theme of shared knowledge. My name is Stefan Bormann, as Christian already told you. I'm a professor of social work, international social work in Landshut, Bavaria, and I'm a board member of the German Association as well as Christian. And we have the pleasure to moderate, to be host of this final session, final panel of this conference. This panel is about the guiding question of how to position social work further as a profession and discipline, and about the current challenges and international comparisons. And when preparing this conference in the board, we became clear to us that once again, how specific actually the academic discourse in Germany about the science of social work was, and to some extent still is. And for that reason, our idea for this final panel was to stimulate an exchange between different perspectives from abroad, from our perspective, so Sweden, Switzerland, and the US, and to contrast the views on social work as discipline and profession. And we therefore invited four well-known colleagues from Sweden, US, and Switzerland to share their ideas on the profession and discipline with a keynote and also in this final panel discussions. And all four colleagues have been introduced in detail before their keynote, so we will get this really, really short. I would like to welcome Professor Haluk Soydan, very early in the morning, as I said before, so thank you very much to join us so early. I hope you have with you. I would like to welcome Professor Silke Müller-Hermann and Professor Roland Becker-Lenz from Switzerland, from the Fachhochschule University of Applied Science, Northwestern, Switzerland in Olten. And we just had the pleasure to listen to Kerstin Svensson from University of Lund. Thank you very much for joining us here at the conference in the panel. We have limited time, so let's start with the first round. Dear colleagues, you all presented a keynote at this conference on the status of the profession and discipline and on shared knowledge and the use of different kinds of knowledges in social work. And such a lecture requires positioning yourself as a researcher within sometimes competing discourses and debates, especially in this international context. And we would like to start with the question, what was the main challenge for you when preparing the keynote, your specific keynote, and your reasoning? So Professor Soydan, can I ask you to start? What was the main challenging with this keynote you gave yesterday morning? I think you have to, the audio is not.
Yes, same time, right? Are we good? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, wonderful.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, good morning and good afternoon, everybody, and Dr. Bormann, especially, and the conference organizers. I'm deeply thankful for being invited to this conference and given this opportunity to discuss a couple of questions at the end of the conference. So the question is, what was the main challenge when I was presenting the keynote and my thinking? Well, when I got the invitation by email, I did read my mission as a very broad one. It included to say something about my own work over the years on history of ideas of social work, as well as something about recent developments of research within the American social work scholarship. So I had to find a balance in terms of time allocation, really, to these topics. This was a challenge of a technical nature. I haven't experienced any challenge in terms of positioning myself in a discourse. I didn't simply see my mission through such eyeglasses, so I was positively surprised to get this question because I would have loved to have that. If a positioning for me was required, I will of course dedicate my talk to the development of evidence-based practice to a so much more larger extent. And all other notions that are in one way or another go with it are offsprings of evidence-based practice. I find such notions, if you want, tools or models, extremely interesting and useful to any science who is raison d'etre is to critically and practically support a profession dedicated to improve human condition. Again, these notions include, but not limited to, for example, intervention research, outcomes research, systematic research reviews, methodology associated with meta-analytic analysis, comparative effectiveness research, translational research, development of quality clearinghouses, and transdisciplinary team science collaboration. And the list really goes on. Also, one type of important infrastructural contribution to science and intervention, such as social work, has been the establishment of Campbell and Cochrane collaborations. These are two worldwide organizations of voluntary scientists and practitioners, even in human professions, policymakers, even patients and clients who contribute to development and dissemination of systematic research reviews of effectiveness studies. These are the fields of research and policy that I am interested in, and it's where I will have positioned myself. So in fact, I see far too many challenges facing the science and profession of social work that are not really, not commenting on them in a key speech will be a challenge in itself. One big set of questions pertains to research and practice gap. Are we as a collective able to conduct high quality, relevant research, relevant that is to the needs of clients? And are we able to successfully translate this research to practice in different settings? Does our research contribute to better and effective tools that social workers can use for betterment of conditions of their clients? Is the social work research community strong enough to attract adequate research funding for high quality research? As well as, is social work research community strong enough to contribute to national agendas as economists, political scientists, engineers, and other professionals usually do? Related to the research and practice gap is the quality of education and training of social workers. The question is then, are we able to provide cutting edge knowledge to our students of social work? Are the educational consequences of keeping social work programs outside the university system where research and teaching are integrated? But finally, and most of all, I worry about whether we are able to provide social work services without harming our clients. Providing service with best intentions is good, but do we know if we do good for the client, and if we do cause harm? So these are the kind of challenges that I will have talked about. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this introductory statement. It was interesting that you started with evidence-based practice as a sign for professionalism in social work, because Kerstin Svensson, in your keynote, you just had a line, or you mentioned that to some extent, for example, when we talk about manuals and guidelines in social work practice, you can also see this as a sign of deprofessionalization. So maybe you would like to add something about this comment, but on the other hand, maybe you can just give us some ideas about your main challenges about presenting in this international context and relating to different kinds of knowledges. Thank you, Kerstin.
Yeah, thank you. I would really like to say something here, because it is a very, very common misunderstanding that when there is a manual, it is evidence-based. A manual doesn't mean that it's evidence-based. And I could say that there is, especially in policy and funding, there is a problem about aiming for everything should be evidence-based. But research, as you know, takes time. So of course we have to have better knowledge. We shouldn't harm our clients. We should know that what we are doing is good. But if we get the idea that everything from tomorrow should be based on profound knowledge on the specific intervention we are doing, we will not manage. We have to build it bit by bit, and we have to accept that we know a lot of things. And there is also a very much will ever be able to know. Social work is about people in society, and that is very, very complex. It will never be fully evidence-based. But of course, when we do interventions, we should know what we are doing. That is nothing strange with that. The problem is the more managerial aspect, where we believe too much that if it's manual-based, it's also evidence-based. Because so far, a lot of studies show that when you study different methods used, you find out that they are not worse than treatment as usual. So we have to accept that there is a lot of things we don't know, but that doesn't mean that we should ignore that it's possible to know more about the effects of what we are doing. We want to make good for people, and we shouldn't be afraid of measuring aspects that can be measured, but we should neither be afraid of accepting that we cannot measure everything, and that in some cases it's the basic humanistic aspects that are important to be listened to feel good at the moment, not to show results in a long run, but to feel good at the moment. So it's different kinds of social work has to be accepted, as I also talked about, but we shouldn't be afraid of evidence-based. There are a lot of positive aspects also with it, but we have to handle that as everything else with care. So just to your question about the challenge before the keynote, I will also add that, of course, with a main message that we always have to acknowledge the specific situation that we're talking about. It is really a challenge to talk about that and knowing that you all come from so different contexts, and you all have your views and in your minds when I talk to you. So that was a challenge. And of course, with this format, we're online, but I don't think it would be so different if we'd been in the same room, because I wouldn't be able to take in all your aspects. I couldn't have a dialogue with all of you and understand where all of your perspective. So that's more of the idea of actually reaching out and talking about diversity without feeling that people were, and still feel that I make myself a bit understandable. That was my main challenge, I would say. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Professor Silke Müller-Hermann, the same question goes to you. I mean, Switzerland, it's a country with 4 different languages, and as far as I know, all different kind of traditions in academia, in science. I recently had a panel with colleagues from the French part of French-speaking part of Switzerland about theories of social work, and we really came to the conclusion it was very different, the concepts we are talking about. So now the question goes to you about this international conference perspective and preparing the keynote. Were there main challenges or not?
Yes, there were quite some challenges, but let me say first of all a few words to what you just said. In Switzerland, it really feels like there are at least two different discourses. You have the French speaking orientated to France discourse, and you have German speaking, and the German speaking discourse in Switzerland and Germany is the same. So my arguments are not so new to you, I guess. Okay, for me, as I said, there were several challenges that I can name and that became apparent during our joint discussions as well. First and foremost, the focus on professional knowledge forced us to examine our own model of professional social work in terms of the types of knowledge that are explicit and implicit in it. This also raised the question of what we mean by knowledge and which aspects of our model can be characterized as knowledge and which are maybe better described as orientations for action. In our presentation, we have tried to justify the necessity of different types of knowledge for the professional practice of social work in terms of professional theory. And based on our research findings, we then named different types of knowledge which, beyond scientific knowledge, apparently guide the actions of social work professionals. Scientific justifications seem to be less important in practice than in theory. What follows from the influence of different types of knowledge for professional action is an important question. So is the question of what contribution science still makes to professional action and what value scientific knowledge has for problem-solving practice. Also, the relationship between different kinds of knowledge must be described, and these questions need to be clarified through further research. And this became clear once again in the preparation of our lecture. What also concerned me in the preparation was the question of the extent to which the discourse on these questions is location bound. Haluk Soydan pointed out yesterday the context dependency of scientific justifications in his lecture. I asked myself whether and to what extent our own model is typical for the German-speaking countries. In this regard, it can certainly be said that our position takes up aspects and questions that are considered significant in other positions of the German-speaking professional discourse. Above all, the strong reference to the individual case, but also, for example, the importance assigned to the person of the professional, the focus on shaping the working relationship, and the analytical case understanding competence as an art, however it is conceptualized. I think these were some of the main challenges for me.
Okay, thank you very much. And last but not least, Roland Becker-Lenz, with the same keynote yesterday, but maybe you would like to strengthen some other points about the challenges to preparing this keynote in this context of the conference.
Yeah, I can add 2 points. I think the first one was not such a big problem as we thought, or as I thought in the beginning of the writing. But the second one remained a problem and was a problem. First point is that we were requested or asked to position us with our position in the discourse and debates, and we are asked to make links to the colleagues with other positions, and that was a theme which engaged us since several years, or which we are engaged since several years. When we developed our position with the professional habitus in the center, we had a lot of questions to other positions. We looked at other positions and asked us what answers do they have to the central questions of institutionalization of social work, and if you ask such questions and if you have debates with colleagues at the first sight, you see a lot of differences, really a lot of differences. But we made the experience when we have debates with the colleagues that the distances get smaller, that the differences get smaller, and that it is possible to see communalities between the positions. Maybe they use other words for the same ideas, and they link the ideas a little bit in other way together, but some dissimilarities seem to be not so big as we thought in the beginning, and that we had a little fear that we could overdo the differences, or even underdo the differences in our presentation. To be precise, to look at close distances in the ideas, and also at the differences in a adequate way. That was one challenge. It was. I thought it would be a challenge in the beginning, but then we recognized that we couldn't go very deep in argumentation and in the connections to other positions. We mentioned them, but we had not the time to go in the detail. So it was at the end not such a big problem as we thought in the beginning. But what I come to the second point, what was a problem is the relationship between science and practice, and the relation between scientific and experiential knowledge. Because I said it at the end of our presentation, we have a lot of, I think, quite unclear concepts to shed light on this relationship, and we have it's a diffuse area. If you would follow me, you have such concepts like relationing or professional knowledge, Professionswissen is it in German, and even concepts like theory. What is a theory is not so clear in social work, or there are disputes about that. So, and if you talk about this relationship between theory and practice, it's hard to be adequate to the position that the colleagues have and do and argue for, and it's sometimes even hard to express their own position in that area. I think it's a very demanding task.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Yes, I can definitely understand that it's not only about translating a term, it's also about the meaning of the term in different contexts, which is quite important. Thank you. Kerstin, I think you might want to go on.
Yes, thanks very much. I think the first question helped us also to see about the many contexts you are connected and the challenges of development of knowledge. And with our second question, we would like to take a closer look on social work as a discipline and profession. The second question would be, looking at social work in the current conditions, what main tasks and challenges do you see for the development of scientific social work or social work as a science? And maybe a second part of the question, what can we in Germany learn from developments in your countries or countries you are working about a knowledge-based social work? So I'm very curious to hear about that, and I pass on the word again to Roland Becker-Lenz.
Okay. I have 3 points, hopefully not too long. The first point is when we talk about professionalism, you can speak about professional competencies which individual social workers do have, and you can. The danger is to come to the idea that the competencies and the knowledge is all you need to act in a professional way. I think this is not the case. It's very important to have good institutionalizations of the logic of professionalism to support the performance of the competencies and the knowledge which the social workers have. You can look in two directions. We need a strong discipline, the institutions of a discipline like the research institutions, the academia, the scientific societies, and the training institutions, and all that. And you can look in the profession, where my main point would be that you have to have a strong professional association, which we don't have in Switzerland, and also you don't have that and you don't have that in Germany. We have only a small amount of social workers which are members of the professional association, the DBSH, and the association has not strong power, and I would say it must have to have this power, and I would say we should have a duty of membership of social workers in such associations to give our interests more power, and to establish standards. Especially professional ethics, which I think is very important for the quality of professional social work, and that should be a standard which should be controlled and should be known and should be implemented, for example. And we need very good laws for our practice. We don't have we don't have good laws in some areas. For example, the professional secrecy we don't have in Germany, and also not in Germany, and that would be very important for the building of trust, for example, between clients and social workers. So we need the development of laws, and you need a strong professional association to have influence in the development of the law. And there are more such points. Also in the if you look in the education, for example, we have only the bachelor degree, and that's I think that's not enough for really professionalism. You need a master degree and a longer practical more time for the practical education. And another point is the clarification of the question of professionality and the delimitation to social movements. What social work is quite unclear, I would say. We have competitive, we have positions which compete, yeah, it's not clear what professional social work is, and that we have not the core of this professionalism. We have no consent about that, and then there's a big problem that because we don't have this core, we cannot make demarcations to lay action. I see in this a big problem. You have to have clear differences between logic of professional action and the logic of lay action, and we are not able to make here a clear borderline. And sometimes I think it's also not wished that the professional association don't want to have such a clear demarcation or borderline, because we need the lay persons to the social movements to have power for our political interests and such things. So they also addressed as social workers, but they are not professional social workers. So I would say we have to have more distance to lay persons, and that would go along with what is called Titelschutz, and I don't know the English word at the moment. You have to protection laws about the people who are qualified to work as a social worker, and also the titles of the people should be protected by law, so that it's guaranteed that no lay persons can work as social workers. We have that situation in Switzerland still in many institutions. And my last point is, sorry if that is too long, that the legitimacy of the social work in public is demanding. We have to legitimize our work more and better than we do that, and that would also need a more strong professional association in two ways: to the quality of the social work, and also to the costs of social work. This is sometimes very often in critique, and I hear not enough voices in that discourse of social work who should argue for this quality and the costs of professional work. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We are still perfectly on time, so don't worry about time. And I think it was very inspiring already to hear your many points and comments from the Swiss and German perspective. I pass on to Silke Müller-Hermann for the second statement.
I can well connect to some arguments here. And I would like to start by addressing the question of the status of social work. If you ask about the status of social work as a profession, then this can be looked at from different perspectives. And firstly, from the perspective of theories of profession. Here, social work is characterized because of its constitution and its legal and organizational framework. And these characterizations can be helpful because they partly draw attention to contradictions with which social work is I'm sorry. I lost my my point. These characterizations from theory, I wanted to argue, can be helpful because they draw attention to contradictions with which social work is confronted. For example, that it does not have an autonomy of action comparable to classical professions. Here, starting points can be identified where a change can be worked towards. Secondly, we can ask about the status quo regarding professional practice, and this is the focus of our empirical research also. How is the action justified? What is it based on? What goals are being pursued, etc.? Research from this perspective draws attention to difficulties and obstacles of professional action. And I now see a challenge for practice in removing or at least avoiding those obstacles that stand in the way of professional action. I have pointed out before that scientific knowledge seems to be of little importance for practice. In our research projects, the evidence-based nature of procedures is also not something that practitioners refer to. If they do, then in the sense of this has proven itself in my practice or in our organization. The question of how evidence-based and how science-based a profession is central to its status and to its acceptance by the public and policymakers. In this respect, too, further clarification of how practice makes use of which knowledge is important. And I also think the question of status of social work is strongly linked to professional associations. I would agree. And what we heard before from Professor Svensson, you have to seek for acceptance in public and from policymakers. I would like to follow up on some reflections of my colleagues on training. And here I also see one possibility to bring practice, science and research closer together. Research and scientific competence would have to be intensified in the training, and that requires appropriate framework conditions and a realistic period of time. So in our school of social work, most students study for 3 years, and that is, in our opinion, not enough. Regarding the question of the science of social work and its status, I'm in favor of being open to different disciplinary knowledge and of further developing findings for the needs of professional practice of social work. If the research competencies and infrastructures at the schools of social work develop further, as it currently looks like, an independent social work science could emerge in the German-speaking countries in the next few years, more than it is currently the case. I also have the impression that the conditions for social work research in Switzerland, where we work, are better than those in Germany. This has to do with both the different teaching obligations and the research funding. At the beginning of the conference, attention was already drawn to the fact that efforts are currently being made in Germany to improve research conditions. I think this is absolutely necessary. That may be one difference between Germany and Switzerland. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much. I can really follow the discrepancies you have been addressing. And I also find it interesting, also in the DGSA, we have a discussion about the master's level as the main requirement to be a social work practitioner. So I think that could be connecting to the idea that a bachelor of 3 or 3.5 years is not enough to fulfill all the complex tasks and challenges of social work. So I will pass on to Kerstin Svensson for the next comment.
Now it worked. Thank you. Talking from a Swedish perspective, I couldn't agree more on what you've said about the importance of the professional associations. That, as I said in my presentation, we have now a license for healthcare social workers. And there are professional associations from different kinds of social workers in Sweden, but we lack organizations for the larger groups. And so far, the organization that has existed has been too dependent on the employers and organizations. So what you have been talking about, forming professional organizations based on the professions and the knowledge of the professions, is very, very important. Also for giving protected title, but also for doing a good job. And then to be a professional association also means to engage in research in the areas where you are active. Because, as I also said before, we should unite as social workers, but we should also accept to be different in social workers in different settings. We have different knowledge. We have need of different kind of research, whether we work with the babies or with the elderly. We do need different kind of knowledge. Some are similar, but a lot are different. So that's why they are needed a lot of different professional association. And that goes back also to the idea of which kind of knowledge is important that you brought up. That because I will raise the concept of epistemological injustice. The idea of there is some injustice in whose knowledge matter. And it is very important that we as professionals, as social workers, we should be better based in science. We should be better based in our training and also in the continued work, because in most contexts where you have a license for doing your practice, you're also required to do something to keep up, show that you are updated and renew the license. It's not about being educated once and then you're forever a social worker. But that doesn't, even if you have high knowledge, you have your high education, you have your base in scientific knowledge, it doesn't mean that your knowledge is the best. You should also be good in combining knowledge. And that is the injustice, the epistemological injustice, that some knowledge is counted, some isn't. And it depends on who is presenting the knowledge. So I think that as I said, connecting this idea about is that we should both be true to the nature of social work, to listen to people, bring in their perspectives, and being scientific in the sense that we know we have the scientific knowledge, but we should be very, very careful of saying that my knowledge is better than yours and put our knowledge on top of others. So the challenge is to actually listen. And that is also the idea of building trust also between what's so often talked about, the gap between research and practice. And in the School of Research School, we have a practitioner in the social services now. We just had a meeting last week where the managers from the social services, they say, well, it's so hard. We don't know anything about research, because they think that the research is so complex and strange, and they forget that they actually are trained and educated, and they have a degree from the university. They have written theses in their education on a scientific base, but that's not real research, because that's something very obscure that someone else is doing somewhere. So to be aware that you actually do have some scientific competence, and acknowledge that we have something that we can share when we meet. Because I think this idea about talking about the gap between practice and research, that is all only damaging. It points at the gap. It doesn't point at either of the parties that could be united. And there is also the idea of that it's some kind of higher status to be a researcher than to be a practitioner. But it's different positions, but the one isn't better than the other. So to build trust between practice and research, to build research on the practice, we had a discussion at our university, or I raised a discussion at our university. We are invited from the university to practice, to give a lecture, to do a presentation. When did we at the university invite a practitioner to give a lecture about their practice? Never. Because our knowledge is better and we should disseminate it to them. So this we and them, let's get over that. Let's see that we have something to exchange. Let's invite the practitioners to give lectures for the teachers at the universities. Because even if we have been social workers in practice, as I myself have been, it is a while. So it has gone a lot of years since I was there. I have a sense of what it means to be in practice, but it's a long time since I was. So I do need the input from practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerstin. I think that was a strong plaidoyer also for the idea of integrative practice research and bringing practice and research more together and building or deconstructing the barriers between. I think that's the topic. And I will pass on to Haluk Soydan now for your plaidoyer for the question.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you so much. In fact, I did read the first part of your question in terms of scientific social work practice. The question reads main tasks and challenges for further development of scientific social work. So I added practice at the end. So if it is correct, let me say the following. Good professional, ethical, no harm social work practice needs, among other things, a solid and sound scientific foundation. Unfortunately, there is no agreement on what is solid and sound scientific foundation. The history of social sciences is very much a history of paradigm wars, as you know. The direction a national policy of mainstream social work practice takes is a matter of negotiations between various levels of decision-making structures and relative power of relevant organizations and actors, including governments, universities, research organizations, professional organizations, etc. During my over 40 years, in fact, 41, professional life in Sweden, I have seen this kind of negotiations in many different roles, time after time. The United States, where I have been active more than 15 years now as a professional, is no different. A scientific social work practice needs, in my view, a solid and sound research production, relevant and useful for those who will ultimately use it, namely social workers. I respect the legitimacy of diverse scientific orientations. They all might serve a purpose. For example, it can be the case that phenomenological research designs are best fit for understanding events such as social and cultural meaning of a conversation, let's say between a social worker and a client. However, when it comes to social work interventions, which social work practice is all about, we need to understand their effects. I have concluded for myself that to measure the effects of social work interventions, experimental studies, especially when randomized and conducted very carefully and large enough to generate statistical power, are the designs that that are best fit for this purpose. Then we need to understand comparative effectiveness of interventions that claim to serve the same purpose. To take a recent example, this is very similar to compare efficacy and effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines of, let's say, Pfizer, BioNTech, the Russian Sputnik vaccine, and the Russian Sinovac. Such results are widely available to read and study and make decisions about which one to choose. That is, if a nation has political and economic options to choose. Further, we need to have strong and engaged translational research in order to adapt to bring interventions to diverse communities. Translational research, at least I have seen it in the United States, is a very much a joint project between researchers and practitioners. Practitioners, in fact, are driving factors, engines many times. And a lot of money is invested in that nowadays. So we need to make generalized scientific evidence work in specific contexts. When it comes to the second question, Christian, it is what can Germany learn from other countries where you are working? I made a little list, some of which I think quite unique to the United States, seen from my perspective of having worked in many countries. So a few factors seem to be important in the United States. First of all, a total on equal basis, a comprehensive integration of social work, education, and training into the research community in Germany is a must, as I see it. Secondly, I mentioned in my talk yesterday, America's Institutes of National Health, a research funding organization, strongly supports social work research in promoting practice-relevant research for the profession. Not only Germany, but all countries need strong and sustainable research funding available to social work research. Number 3 on my list is tailored training programs for future generations of researchers, especially on postdoctoral level. It's a must, I believe, for advancement of the science of social work. To my knowledge, no high-level American school today will hire a young tenure-track scholar who does not have a successful postdoctoral training. Again, investment in translational research that aims to bring generalized evidence to specific sociocultural organizational settings, make it work, it turns out, very beneficial to practitioners who work in diverse settings. And finally, in my list is investment in comparative effectiveness studies. It's a relatively new strategy in social work research in the United States, but it turns out to be very promising. Such studies teach us what works in what settings more effectively than others, economically cheaper, and with higher degree of client approval. So thank you so much.
So thanks very much. I think that was a long and a strong list and many tasks that we could take from it. And I think it's a lot of topics that are also very applicable for Germany and German-speaking countries. So I think now it's time already to look to the end of the final panel. I think we had a big overview from different backgrounds, different countries, different traditions, different research experiences. But first of all, I have to say thank you to the 4 of you and to Stefan for being here together. And I think it was very inspiring and very fruitful to sum up also your presentations and your lectures now in that final panel. And I think that helped again to connect and to see what's behind your thesis and topics. So thanks very much. And I think we need a big applause for you.
Thank you so much, Christian. Let me take this because you have all your crowd with you today. So as I did express that previously, over the years, I have been extremely impressed by the discussions with my colleagues in Germany. I learned a lot. I know that we have very different orientations at times, not always, but perhaps many times. But it has been amazingly stimulating for me. So thank you so much, everyone.
Yes, and thank you also that we could have you. And I think it's a good tradition to continue in discussion. And that was a good opportunity to connect to older debates we had already been having between Germany and United States, or especially between colleagues and you. And I found it also interesting to see that the evidence-based practice is a word we hardly used, and the word that shouldn't be named sometimes. But I think it was enlightening to see that's a bit more behind than maybe just technical managerial handling of social work, but rather research-based and theoretical concept. So thanks very much for reminding us and bringing that discussion together. And also to the others, also to Kerstin and Roland Becker-Lenz and Silke Hermann, thanks very much for being here and being part. And I think the discussion will continue, but we maybe made a bit in the right direction today. So thanks very much. And I would ask you to stay in the room, and we now go to the final ceremony and the farewell. But thanks very much for being part of the conference and for being here.
Thank you all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation and the challenges.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Thank you.
Yes, I hope we didn't have too many challenges, but we also wanted to hear a bit. So I hope we found the right way.
Sometimes you need to have someone who gives you challenges from time to time. So thank you.
Okay, bye-bye, farewell.
Yes, and thanks very much. And now I pass on to Barbara Thiessen for the final words, and we also maybe can switch to German again. Thanks very much.